Hi, welcome back to the Black Mold of Grief. I'm Thomas Graves, and we are continuing with an A and B episode for the holidays, where the A episode is a little more about grief and how I get through the holidays, a little more intense. B episodes, which is what this is a little bit more lighthearted, and I'm doing these stories because these are stories I want to bring with me to my first conversation in heaven. And again, I keep talking about that, but I don't want to just talk about it. I thought I would share it with you. And so this week's story is the time that I really offended a mechanic and his Parrot. So it was here in Nashville, and I found a really good mechanic through a friend, very trustworthy, good guy. So I go, and because I had to get there early in the morning and I work in restaurants, like none of my friends could take me because nobody gets up that early. So I was like, all right, I'll just have to sit there and wait, which is fine. So I get there, and it is a true old school auto shop. It's cinder block. And I go in the office, and it's the dark wood paneling from the 70s with green shag carpet and the window unit for the AC. And there was a TV, but it had rabbit ears. So there was no cable, TV, there was nothing. So he takes my car, he starts working on it. I'm sitting there, and he's got these magazines that are like 10, 15 years old at this point. And so I'm just kind of sitting there for 3 hours, and as I'm sitting there, I look, and he has this giant parrot in a giant cage. And so I'm just watching the parrot, and I have this thought. And, the old lollipop commercials where it was like, how many licks does it take to get the center of a lollipop? I start wondering, how many times do you have to repeat something before a parrot repeats it back? And so I'm like, that's an interesting question. And I have 3 hours to kill and a parrot, and I'll probably never have this opportunity again to figure this out. So I come up with a phrase that I will not admit to. And so I decide I'm going to see if this parrot can repeat this phrase and how many times it takes me saying it before he repeats it. And so I go over to the cage, and, he's cool, and I'm just kind of looking at him, and I don't put my fingers in the cage, any of that stuff. I'm just standing there. And so I start saying this, and I don't know how many times you have to repeat something before a parrot repeats it, but I do know it's more than 250 times, because that's where I was saying this over and over again. And so I don't know if the parrot was offended that maybe I thought he didn't know that phrase, since he does work with a mechanic, or if the parrot was offended at my impression of a parrot, but the parrot was pissed. So he starts ruffling his feathers, and they start going out. And the problem is, I'm have an English degree, and I'm very fascinated by cliches and phrases and words and the origin of all that stuff. And I'm always wondering, on any cliche, it's a cliche now, but somebody somewhere thought of it first. And that's always fascinated me. And so with the ruffling your feathers, I had never had a bird before. I'd never been near a bird, so I'd never actually seen it. And so when his feathers stand up, I was like, oh, wow, that's where that phrase comes from. And the other thing that hit me was, previous to that moment, I'd always pictured that feathers were kind of like hair. There was just a whole bunch of them they laid down. But his were straight up. And then the other thing was, there's actually not as many feathers as I pictured. There were actually quite few, comparatively speaking. And on top of that, I didn't realize that birds can actually pivot each individual feather and make it move, again, not like hair. And so I was standing there just amazed at this. And as I'm engrossed in this, observing all of this, What I didn't observe was that to the left of me on the wall between the office and the shop, he had installed a very large picture window so that he could keep an eye on his parrot. So I'm still watching this parrot pivot all these different feathers around, and I'm just amazed by that. And I kind of hear a door open and slam against the wall, but again, I'm still kind of focused. And then I kind of hear this big thud of somebody walking towards me, but still not clicking. So I hear a second thud. Okay, well, I need to see what this is. And as I look up, the mechanic's there, and he's a looks like a wrestler. He's a tall man, and he just gets like an inch from my face, and he screams, "Stop f***ing with my parrot!" And when you're not expecting that, it can be pretty startling. So it really threw me out of nowhere because like I didn't think he was there, and then suddenly he was. So when he says that, I think I went airborne backwards, because next thing I know, I'm sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, and I don't remember walking to it. I just remember jumping backwards and ending up in a chair. And so I apologized to him. He just turns around and heads back out in the shop. And so for the rest of the time, I just stared at the floor. I didn't look at the parrot. I don't know if the parrot was looking at me. Don't know. I wasn't looking at him. And so finally everything's done with my car. So he gives me the car. And I did check my brakes 3 times before I got on the highway, just to be sure. And they worked. So the mechanic was much more professional than I was. And the parrot was wise enough not to follow my lead and try and learn this phrase. So now in that part of Nashville, everything's kind of been torn down and rebuilt into luxury condos. So my hope is that the mechanic got enough money for his land that he and his parrot are now on a beach somewhere, relaxing and away from people like me. If you like Southern rock, you're going to love Sandrine's version. And I met her through Marcelo. He was on the project and understood it. And he said, "You have got to hear this woman." And he was right. She did a great version with her band. And it is just full of power. She's got a lot of power. She did a ton of harmonies with it. And it just has this groove to it that is different from everything else. And it has a phenomenal bridge to it where it just builds and builds and builds. And then she hits this note that just holds and holds and holds. And it really shifts that part of the album forward in tempo and energy. Thanks again for spending time with us on the Black Mold of Grief. Next week, we'll continue with 2 episodes, one for grief specific, and then one more with a story I want to bring to heaven. And so please join us for that. But in the meantime, I hope something I've said here helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven.